Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is the Gross Out podcast. I'm your host, Jay Faulkner, and we're here to talk about open source and gross you out with the dirty details of what actually happens when getting it done. I like to always thank G-Research Open Source Software for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation and do a little bit of outreach with the podcast. But today, I'm actually really excited. In the past, for a lot of these sessions, I've been talking to someone who maybe I don't know a lot about their project or have a lot of technical questions. This is actually an interaction here that has impacted me personally, impacted my job here personally, provided a lot of fulfillment for me. So I'm really happy to have Alex Gornet here to talk to us a little bit about Major League Hacking, or MLH. Alex, do you maybe want to say a few words about yourself? If you're known by any like nicknames in the community or like a GitHub username or something like that folks might know you by, and tell us a little bit about yourself and about MLH.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on as a guest, Jay, and obviously everything you've done for MLH as well. I'm Alex Gornet with Major League Hacking. I'll refer to it as MLH from here on out, just because it can be a mouthful to say over and over. There's a good chance some of you are familiar with us and maybe have gone to one of our hackathons or other events, but for those that don't know much about us, basically we exist to help bridge the gap between student and early career developers and what I like to call the real wide world of technology. We do this through different programs and events like hackathons and also through our fellowship program, which we'll talk about in more detail here. But really what we're trying to do is give students, people that are interested in technology, really anyone that is trying to break into a career in tech, the opportunity to learn about new products, build their skills, and for companies to help them grow talent pipelines, get people contributing to their open source projects, and all other sorts of cool things. So really excited to be here today and share more about that.
So how did MLH get started, and like how did you get involved with MLH? Like what was the inspiration? I'm actually particularly curious. Like obviously we're G-Research Open Source Software, we're gross, so like the naming is kind of fun. And I feel like Major League Hacking kind of has that same element to it, that there might be a story behind it or something. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you all haven't heard it, definitely recommend looking up one of our CEOs. You know, maybe the first 60 to 90 seconds of a speech or presentation he's done. But the really short version is he was actually studying to be a lawyer, and on a whim went to a hackathon with a friend and pretty much changed his entire career trajectory. At this hackathon, he was like, "This is so cool. Why have I never heard of coding or programming? Why didn't I know that software development existed?" As he went along his journey, though, he starts looking and he's like, there's not really many of these hackathons out there, though. So how are other people learning about this, or how are other developers getting together into a community? So we're very much best known for, or originally known for, our hackathon league, where we have 250 events every year that over 100,000 developers across the world attend. So it's pretty awesome to see that impact. What is a little bit more recent is the fellowship program that we've created. The hacking term, people are always curious. Are you all in cybersecurity? Like, what exactly do you do? Hacking very much comes from the term hackathon. It's always fun to clarify that with friends and family when they're asking me about my job.
So I'm gonna kind of put the fellowship stuff on a shelf a little bit because I know a little bit about that, but I want to dig into the hackathon bit because that's kind of interesting to me. It's I sort of grew up in tech a lot as hackathons were starting to become a thing, and so I'm curious how you judge a hackathon. Like you make it sound almost like an Olympic competition for coding or something like that. So can you tell us a little bit about like maybe an example challenge or how it might be graded? Like is it about creativity or skill or some combination?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, hackathons are there, and the underlying theme is that you are there to learn. But there is a competitive element as well. So some people, I play tennis. Sometimes I like to think of it as like a weekend tennis tournament, but for software developers. People are there to meet other developers. They form up and have a team. And over the course of 24 to 48 hours, their goal is to build some sort of project. It might be a web app. It might be a mobile app. For some people, it might be a simple website if they're just learning how to code. But there's usually different tracks that somebody can submit to. So sometimes they're going to be very general, just like best overall hack, where you're often going to see winners that have created a really complex end-to-end idea or use case. Probably not production ready yet, right? It is a hackathon, but really gone deep into a certain area. You also have more specific tracks where it will be often, best use of and a certain technology. So I'm going to use pick a database that you like. It would be best use of such and such database. And so the winner there will be someone that either had a novel use case or somehow integrated into their project in a unique way. So the thing that's cool though is that while it is competitive, you'll often find people are really supportive, very helpful. There's mentors, there's coaches, there's other people there like that for you to help out. And really, you're just there to learn about new technologies. And often people will push you to get out of your comfort zone, right? Is maybe you've won before, but you've never done something in Python, or you've never done something involving a login workflow, whatever it may be. The goal isn't necessarily to go there and just win at hackathon after hackathon after hackathon. It's very much to learn new things and broaden your skill set.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I still remember pretty distinctly one of the hackathons I participated in. At this point, it's probably about 10 years ago when I was just starting to transition from operations to being a software developer. I wrote my first C program in a hackathon. I wrote like a PS clone that did like 2 or 3 columns of fields, and it wasn't anything impressive. It wasn't something groundbreaking. The code's probably lost to the sands of time, but it's a good opportunity to have a lot of people there, a lot of people who could help teach me, help me get over humps and go, is this really how it works? Yes, it is. Because sometimes even when you're writing code, the paths you take are not quite as gilded and pretty as you might think. So has there ever been a case where maybe something that was produced at a hackathon as a prototype or as an idea might have blossomed into something larger or something that kind of persisted beyond the hackathon?
Yeah, so I would say hackathons, it's maybe more the ideas that can come to fruition in the long term, right? There's all sorts of programming and business decisions you'll have to make after the fact. Offhand, I don't have an example ready. I'm very certain that there is. Because in addition to MLH hackathons, right, you also find that there are other hackathons out there that actually cater to professional software developers, or will have some pretty substantial prizes and incentives involved that they're trying to solve. So I don't have one offhand, but I would be willing to bet that you can go and find a host if we had a proper database in place for it.
Oh yeah, I know personally of at least a couple of situations where like an idea might have come out of a hackathon that ended up becoming, an open source project or even an entire startup company. And so it's nice, and I think that time pressure is pretty good to help you get something done in a short period of time. So that's cool to talk about the hackathons and kind of that seems to be the place that MLH and the fellowship idea grew out of. But let's talk a little bit about the fellowships. But before we get too much into that, we actually have a video here that's kind of going to demonstrate how fellowships can have a real impact on people's lives, and specifically at G Research and G Research Open Source Software.
Hello, I'm Juan from G Research Open Source, and I would like to extend a big thanks to Alex from MLH and my pod leader, Brad, for helping me take my first steps into the world of open source development. So they really helped me understand the value of open source and how anybody, regardless of experience level, can actually get started and start making pull requests. So that's how I got started into open source. And now 1 year later, I'm still going strong as part of the G Research open source software. Once again, a big thanks to everybody at MLH and especially Alex for helping make this possible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christos and I was part of the MLH Fellowship back in February 2022. The program is designed to prepare people for an engineering job while they're contributing to open source projects. So you gain the experience that you need, and at the same time, you're giving back to the community. I was lucky that MLH matched me and my skills with the right project and people, and eventually I got a job offer out of it. But even if that didn't happen, I would still be fine, because I gained so much from the program that I would easily be able to get any other engineering job. The fellowship kickstarted my career, and I can't stop recommending it to people who are just starting in tech.
The Julie Hacking Fellowship was my first introduction to open source software, and it significantly shaped my career path. Before MLH, I was an electrical engineer in Scotland, and now I live in Canada, working exclusively on open source software at GR-OSS and open source AI research in my graduate studies, as well as having some of the nicest colleagues I could ask for. Without MLH, none of this would have been possible. I want to thank everyone at MLH for letting me take part.
From my experience, being part of the MLH Fellowship is one of the best things that can happen to a young tech career because it connected me to a pool of experienced and budding software engineers alike, mentors, gave me a head start into open source contribution and development, even gave me an opportunity to land a remote software engineering role. I would like to give a big shout out to Alex and Amanda, my pod leader, Brad, and my pod mates. If I have my way, I'd like to be part of this wonderful program in the spirit of giving back to the community, meeting more beautiful people, and even getting more exposure. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mehdi. I participated in the MLH Fellowship during the summer of 2022, and it was a game changer for my career. As a fresh graduate, the program offered me a unique opportunity to integrate into an open source team and contribute to impactful software. Being mentored by highly skilled engineers was invaluable. The program didn't just enhance my skills, but also opened doors for me, as it was the main reason for me to land this position at GR-OSS, where I now contribute to open source as part of my job. Thanks to the MLH team for making this possible.
Yeah, and one of the fun things here is that I'm not necessarily a mentee, but I too can have a bit of a testimonial. Two of the gentlemen who were just speaking, Adam and CID, have been working with me on the OpenStack team at GR-OSS Open Source Software. CID is the number 3 overall contributor in terms of commits for the latest Dalmatian OpenStack Ironic release. Adam's made huge progress in the client work we're doing. And as someone who works on a project that isn't always, going to be at the forefront, working on open source cloud software is not necessarily the most attractive thing. I don't think people go to the hackathons to write Redfish drivers, but giving those people a door, giving those folks an opening to see the open source, to see the value that's being created there in all sorts of places has been huge. And I really wanted to say thank you to MLH for helping out with that, of making sure that the door doesn't shut behind us. Because I know that if it wasn't for having, not necessarily through the MLH program, but that sort of mentoring relationship, I don't know where I would be as someone who was self-taught, who learned as I went. I've had many mentors along the way, and I appreciate you getting, helping me pair up with folks to sort of maybe pass that on and go a little further. And I think that video demonstrates how it's not just, a specific story to OpenStack or to Jay's team. It's something that we've seen throughout GR-OSS, of getting these high quality individuals who are curious, who want to learn, and who want to move forward and integrating that. Because once you learn how to learn, everything else can come after that. So we do want to say thank you for that. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, and help us understand how you get that pipeline going to that kind of ends with these awesome people working on open source.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. That means a lot to hear you say that. And I think I could speak for everyone at MLH that a big part of why we do what we do is because of what you hear in those videos. It's all about helping that next generation of developers and making sure that we have a sustainable talent pipeline, and especially with open source, that we're getting new people into these communities so that these tools continue to be supported and innovated and maintained into the future. The talent pipeline part, I think, is actually one of the most interesting aspects of it, because it is an extremely competitive program. So, we're often reviewing thousands of applicants for a very select number of spots. The way that it's really happened, though, is that because we have hackathons all across the world, and we have such a large global community, that people are really familiar with the Major League Hacking brand or with MLH. And so when we started this program, it was a very natural next step for them, where people were like, okay, well, I've gone to a hackathon and, I've built this project, but now I want to actually know, how do I take this and apply it to the real world? So there's a lot of interest and demand, as you can imagine, for people in the student space, for self-taught developers, for people that are changing careers maybe, and coming through. And those are all people that we've had in our program. And we kind of think of it as we're trying to sift through both their technical acumen, right, just in terms of what sort of proficiency do they have? Are they a right fit for this project? Can they come in and make a meaningful contribution? But I also think just as important are some of those soft skills. I will say that I always think of the technical skills are sort of table stakes. The fellows that I see are the most successful are the ones that are curious, the ones that are eager, and the ones that are really communicative and make the most of that mentorship opportunity.
So one of the things that I think would be interesting to think about is, let's say there's someone listening to this right now that, is thinking about being an MLH fellow. What's a piece of advice that maybe you would give them to prepare for applying for a fellowship to kind of get seen among that sea of applicants?
Yeah. So first of all, GitHub's going to be really important. We do a pretty lengthy trawl through GitHub. Go spamming your GitHub and just star a bunch of repositories or something like that. But being comfortable with putting your personal projects on there, even if it's maybe not perfect yet, that's a sign to us that you are actively trying to code, but also that you're interested in learning. And then I think the second one that really is your chance to shine is going to be the essay section. With any application, whether it's for MLH or college or whatever program you want to be in, I think essays are always that part where you can tell us what makes you different, right? Like why are you different than this other person who might have the exact same skills and would be a good fit for a project? What's going to make you unique that you bring to this opportunity? And everyone that does come through, typically is getting some form of feedback, right? Or we have some other resources to help you with that. We don't like it to be a black hole necessarily of how does the application process work. We try to be pretty transparent about it.
Yeah, that's pretty good. It's I think a lot of people don't even understand the amount of writing and asynchronous communication there is in open source, because you think about writing an essay as something that you might would do in school or in an English class, but the reality is some of the best mailing list posts that are arguing passionately about some feature going left instead of right, they're essentially essays. They're persuasive essays, and that it's interesting to hear that skill brought out. But what about the flip side? Like if there's someone listening to this who is thinking, how could my business leverage MLH or coordinate with MLH to help bring up the next level of talent, or maybe even act as a talent pipeline into the company in general?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. The two big things, or a couple big things I think we hear from companies are, number one, that there's just limited bandwidth. Software developers are stretched thinner and thinner every single year. You all are being asked to do more and more. And as a maintainer of an open source project, that doesn't mean just building new features and contributing to the project. It also means oftentimes managing the community and reviewing other people's pull requests. And so part of what we're coming in to do is to essentially free up additional capacity for you to get contributions. Sometimes it's going to be new features. Oftentimes it's going to be stuff like bug fixes or other things in the queue that are highly important and the community is requesting, but you just don't have time to get to. The second piece of it is very much that talent pipeline aspect. And using Gross as an example, I think you all have hired 9 fellows out of the program at this point, either into part-time or full-time. And so it's a great feeder, and it's a great way to develop that early stage talent and find a promising junior developer or emerging developer that you want to bring on your team. And I think something that's really cool with it as well is coming back to, how do we find these people, is you don't have to do any of the recruiting. You don't have to do any of the screening. You don't have to do any of the assessing. We're really taking on a lot of the admin. And honestly, what I'll say is like the headache that can come with open source or come with finding junior talent for you, and offloading that so that you can focus on the really high quality, high impact mentorship and the actual technical pieces of a project.
So something that I'm curious about, I've worked with other programs. Like I know that Outreachy has done some work with OpenStack in the past. As an example, there's some members of our community from that. Is there anything that really sets MLH apart from those other groups? Like, is there some special sauce that y'all have, or is it, just lots of different options, a McDonald's and a Hardee's kind of question?
Yeah, no, great question. First of all, the other programs are great. So I want to make sure that in the context of this answer, this is not to diminish those programs. But when we built the fellowship, we intentionally made it to where it would be a bit more structured, because we really want to make sure that fellows and both maintainers had the support they needed. And so when we come into it, first we were thinking, how can we make maintainers' lives as easy as possible? What are all the things we can take off the plate for them? Because we know they don't have that much time, but this would be a really valuable connection for them. And then for fellows, how can we make this as awesome of experience as possible so this is a springboard for them into their careers. And the main way we do that is through what we call the MLH pod leader. So the pod leader, you can almost think of like a part-time manager, I suppose, or kind of like this technical manager. We have them lead several meetings every single week. So they'll do 2 stand-ups and a retro. They're also attending what we call office hours, which is the main request we have of maintainers. It's just 1 call per week where fellows know they can get questions solved or, dive through code, pair program. Like Jay said, though, almost everything is async in the program. But the goal being here is that fellows have an introduction to the regular practices and ceremonies of a software development team. But we also have a way to monitor their progress, mainly so we can support them, right? And see, oh, you have this blocker. Let's make sure we funnel that to the maintainer, or the pod leader would be like, actually, I know how to do this. We had this problem 2 cohorts ago, and it's a really simple fix. Let me help you out there.
Yeah, I imagine especially the time management is a tough problem. I know that when I was that age, trying to juggle work and school responsibilities and things at the same time would be incredibly difficult. So I know that structure's got to be very helpful for those folks.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice too, because the way we've built it is that fellows can participate alongside school or alongside a part-time internship. To your point, it does take some thoughtful time management, but it's not you have to pick an either or. It's often this supplement and this accelerator to activities that they're already doing.
So we sort of check the box on like the obvious stuff for MLH. Is there anything that maybe is like a hidden gem or a hidden value in there? Something that maybe folks wouldn't think of when they think of like good that MLH is doing in the world or for their mentors or mentees that maybe you want to shine a light on with folks listening?
Yeah. So the most rewarding thing I would say about MLH, and part of the reason I decided to work there, I think part of the reason that other people have decided to work there, is that it's not just this technical skill building or this on ramp to the fellowship, and not that those things aren't important and awesome, but there's literally like these life changing aspects where people point to an MLH event or an MLH experience as a turning point in their tech journey and career. And I think you often see it with our student community, because for some of them, right, they're not really sure like what's this path look like, and MLH sort of shines this light on it. For maintainers, I think it's been awesome to hear from them of, hey, this was the first new junior developer we've had come in 6 months or whatever time frame. And with the open source aspect specifically, something we are really passionate about is giving back to open source in this way. So while we're working with companies and business, there is very much this element of we want to support open source ecosystems and communities. Here's a way that we can come and do
that. Okay. So one thing we generally ask all of our guests to come on here to do, we sort of have, the whole podcast is called GR-OSS OUT. So the idea is, open source isn't clean. It's not always a great path from A to D. There's bumps along the way. There's trials, tribulations, but, you get to overcome them. So you maybe have a story about, your time working in open source or at MLH or in your career where there's been that kind of gross moment where something bad has happened, and how did you overcome that? And maybe even generally, if you've got a fellow listening to this call right now who might be going through that valley, what advice would you give them to emerge from the other side?
Yeah, I'll first love the name of the podcast. I should have said this earlier. I think it's one of the coolest podcast names I've ever heard. A story that comes to mind for me was actually one of the fellows with the Gross team earlier this spring. And I wouldn't necessarily say that he encountered a blocker, but I like his story because I do think it highlights what the messiness of open source can be sometimes, and it also reinforces how important communication is. So this fellow was working with the DevRel team with Gross and was tasked with auditing a host of different repos. I think it was 20, 21, somewhere in that range, and seeing how they aligned with the OpenSSF scorecard. Ultimately, the goal being that we can get these in the proper security posture, make them more credible, just make sure that everyone is confident in how the repos are being managed. And Fellow had a pretty good research background, so phenomenal fit for it. Went through, developed their methodology, developed the whole process for it. The spot where it gets tricky, though, is now going to a maintainer and saying, hey, I found all these things that I think would be really beneficial for you to fix. But we all know what happens when you just come in and do that, right? Or if you just come in and start creating bug reports or submitting issues without any context or relationship. And so I would say the gross out part here is that not only did this fellow have to do the research, the fellow then had to properly communicate this to every single different maintainer across the board about why it's important, but also how they could support in that realm. And I think it really underscores the community and the communication aspect of open source. Of there's all these different people, and it's so important to make sure that you understand the situation, that your ideas and your contributions will be well received, because you can have the best idea, but if nobody's on board with it, it does not matter whatsoever, and your idea has been lost forever.
I've been doing open source either as, user, operator, developer for around 20 years now. And it still is one of the scariest moments when you're going into a new repository, a new project you've not interacted with, and opening an issue, and just, it really is a scream into the void moment. And you hope that the void screams back, that someone responds and replies, that maybe you catch them on a day where they're going to be nice to you and not frustrated that you just added things to their list. And so that is, I think, a bit of an up and down, and it's tough to understand, especially when you start, why someone would be skeptical when you come into them with issues. But once you've been around a while, you realize that there's always a lot of more people who are willing to come and file the issues and not follow up, which I think is the power of MLH, is that y'all guys help them with that follow up. There's, I'll be honest, I'm not a planner, and when I do my mentoring for MLH, it's always one of the hardest things, because y'all make us lay out, here's exactly what we expect to happen. We have expectations that there'll be this milestone by this week, and, laying out the journey that the person's going to go out on. And that helps us avoid those kind of problems. It helps avoid those surprises. So that's interesting. A little bit of an open source moat that maybe MLH helps bridge over a bit there.
Yeah,
but is there anything else you wanted to share with our audience about MLH, or, maybe if someone wants to get involved before we let everyone go?
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, how do I get started in open source, or you think the fellowship is a good fit for you, would love to have you apply. If you go to the Major League Hacking Fellowship website, you'll see the big, beautiful apply now button that you can press and go through our regular application process. Our next cohort starts at the end of January, so that'll be our spring 2024 cohort. So you definitely have some time to put that together. Likewise, if there are companies out there listening and you've been wondering, how do I get new junior developers into my open source team, or I'd love to use it as a way to grow out my junior developer pipeline and get new people onto the team in general, would love to speak to you. You can find me on Discord at AJGorn01. You can find me on LinkedIn, not always the most popular, but definitely an easy way to find one. If all else fails, reach out to Jay. He could certainly let you know how to get in touch, but would always love to connect with other people, share more about the program, and see if it's a fit for you all.
Yeah, we'll make sure that links to the ways to contact Alex and the ways to apply to MLH either end up in the video description on YouTube or in the podcast description area if you're listening on your favorite podcast app. So thank you again very much for your time, Alex. I'd like to thank the folks for listening in. We'll make sure to have some videos here highlighting. I think we probably have a couple of things up here from some of our MLH fellows, so I'll see if we can highlight that at the end of the YouTube video. But for now, I'm Jay Faulkner. This is the G Research Open Source Software Outreach Podcast, the GR-OSS OUT Podcast. Thank you, Alex, for being here. Thanks to G Research for enabling us to do this, and thanks for listening. You can smash that like button, subscribe, leave a review. It would help us out a whole lot in gaining reach here. But for now, I'm Jay Faulkner, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.